Hi, it's Global Politics with Jim Martin. Today I want to talk about World War I and its lessons for us today. As a kid, I was fascinated with the experiences of my grandfather, who served in the Army, soon to be the Air Force, during World War II. He mostly served in the Pacific Theater, but at the end of the war was also assigned to European matters and spent the post-war years there in Europe. He was not at all interested in reliving those experiences for my benefit. I rarely heard him talk about it at all. As a result, I dove into the books, all the books I could get at the local library to learn as much as I could, and watched a lot of documentaries. Like when I was a kid, there was a PBS show called The World at War that I would catch as often as I could. Along the way, I picked up things about World War I. That said, World War II was really my focus. Later, when I was studying for my master's and PhD, I would have told you that I really didn't know that much about World War I. A few years back, right as the pandemic was ending, I visited Kansas City to attend a conference for work, and one of the activities that they sponsored was an excursion to the National World War I Museum there in Kansas City. I was really surprised. It's a great museum, by the way, and if you're in the area, you should definitely go if you're into that kind of thing. It was incredibly detailed and useful, and what surprised me was how much of that I remembered from just pouring through books as a kid. Things about the monarchs and the various industrial powers and the different types of aircraft, the camouflage schemes and all this sort of thing. They have great dioramas, actual relics. It's great. So check it out if you have a mind. A few months back, I also stumbled across a copy of Barbara Tuckman's book, The Guns of August. I snatched it up. I'd heard of it, never read it. I snatched it up and read it over a trip to San Diego. Tuckman, though an incredibly thorough historian, did not have a degree or anything like that. And she delved into the really arcane and deep dive details of the individuals that were involved in the pre-war years to some extent, but most of the focus of the book is on the month or so preceding the war and about maybe 6 weeks, the first 6 weeks of the war. As I read through it, some unsettling rhymes became apparent when considering the 2 or 3 decades preceding World War I and our current time frame. The world was going through a tumultuous throes of a massive economic transformation. Industrialization, the Industrial Revolution, had started some years earlier, but it was really hitting high gear in many countries. At the same time, the countries, more accurately, the bankers, the business people, the finance ministers remained staunchly protectionist. There was no free trade at this time. So trade was more of a rapacious, penetrative act that it has been in our lifetimes. Furthermore, colonial powers still existed. France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others remained committed to extracting wealth from those territories with really no benefit for the indigenous peoples of those countries. Bitter trade wars were quite common. Hey folks, it's Global Politics with Jim Martin. Only 10% of the folks who watch my videos are actually subscribed. If you could, take a minute and subscribe to my channel. It helps me to grow the channel and provide the kind of timely, in-depth analyses that you've come to enjoy and that I enjoy putting on for you. If you could do that, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot and have a great day. The nations that had already moved down the path of industrialization had discovered that they could make and sell a lot of weapons and a lot of different sorts of weapons. The leaders of various nations who thought they had some extra cash lying around who wanted to show off equipped their armies with the latest and greatest of whatever they could get from wherever they could buy it. Others, like Russia, were kind of left out in the cold, stuck with technologically inferior weapons, tactics, and logistics though no one really knew that. Speaking of those leaders, many of them were the product of monarchies or were monarchs themselves. Of course, Tsar Nicholas of Russia was a monarch, Kaiser Wilhelm was a monarch, as was Franz Joseph, Albert of Belgium, and Mehmed V of Turkey / Ottoman Empire were actual monarchs, of course. Many of the leaders of France were the legacy of colonial behavior and roles definitely, to me, seem to play out in their personalities and the way that they acted. And of course, in the United Kingdom, the monarchy, despite having a reduced political role, still maintained a tremendous influence on the governments of the United Kingdom. This led Europe to be what might be very charitably called an insular gentleman's club. None of these folks spent much, if any, time with people that were below their stations in life, and also were generally not well educated. They were infused, though, with a rock solid belief in their privilege and their own superior reasoning powers, mostly because they could throw money at things, possessed of a variety of religious and ethnic prejudices, and were easily prone to manipulation by those around them that connive to achieve their own personal ends. Furthermore, we got to remember that there were no international institutions, really. There was no UN, no International Monetary Fund, no World Bank, no NATO, no Five Eyes, or anything of the sort. Institutions of national intelligence like today's MI6 or CIA or the FSB in Russia also did not really exist. The closest thing at the time to some sort of diplomatic and intelligence gathering network would have been the royal families themselves. They wrote letters back and forth to across all the borders of Europe. So they were more in touch with each other and what situations were, or at least perceptions of situations were. But as far as military intelligence or that sort of thing, it was poor at best. This meant that the political leaders in these countries were mostly out of touch with things in their own countries, let alone the wider world. This ignorance led them to be susceptible to the slipperiest voices in their regimes. Again, people that did not have a national interest in mind, but only their own. The leaders, of course, were told that they had the loudest voices and the biggest toys and the best palaces, and they liked to keep it that way. Displays of opulence were outdone at every turn in all of these capitals, and bitter jealousies arose amongst the royals and would-be royals over competition for respect from their peers. This arrogance played out in a couple of ways. First, most of these leaders had no idea what it meant to finance a modern state, and no one to tell them any different. They had no real backstops if these judgments failed. Today, or at least heretofore, if a country runs into difficult financial straits, they can appeal to institutions like the World Bank and the IMF and others for loans and other sorts of financial instruments that will help them kind of tide over and get through a period of difficulty. Second, there was a intense military competition going on. Everybody wanted to have the biggest navy, the biggest army, all of these things. This led them to spend way too much on many of those things. That meant that many of their economies were teetering on a frighteningly unstable pedestal and unable in a pinch to take care of the basic needs of their people. When things started to slip towards war, there was really nothing standing in the way of that calamity. And surprisingly enough, only a very few people really saw it coming, one of them being a British diplomat. I can't remember his name. The tidal wave of death and destruction and revolution that swept over the world during World War I and after were shocking, massive, and complete. Many who might have done good things, great things, were swept away into unmarked graves in the mud of the trenches of France, the mountains of Italy, the western steppes of Russia, the deserts of the Middle East, or the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. So what is it about this period of time that gave me an eerie sense of rhyming history? The leaders of the most powerful countries today, including our own, are really in information bubbles of their own making. This is particularly true of Russia and China. There are several open conflicts, like Ukraine, and flashpoints that could serve, just as Serbia once did, as a spark for a wider conflict. The Baltics, Taiwan, Kashmir, Poland, Venezuela, and the South Caucasus, just to name a few. Powerful, arrogant, wealthy, and typically unelected men are ascendant. They're using their power to craft politics that meet their ends, not those of the nation or the people. Over the last decade, the death knells of globalization, free trade, have signaled the beginning of a new world economic regime. It seems to me to be mercantilist and protectionist in nature. We see the tariffs, we see the trade wars. The countries of the world are scrambling to see how they will respond to that, and new trade blocs and agreements are emerging that will be unstable and competitive in not the best ways. Many smaller and less wealthy countries are likely to be left out in the cold by this and left to fend for their own, and many will disintegrate. Global institutions that have maintained a semblance of order and, most importantly, have prevented continent-spanning wars are dying. Similarly, financial institutions are also reeling from the end of interdependence. Finally, democracy as a system is under threat globally and in the United States. Many democracies like France and the United Kingdom, Germany to an extent, South Korea, others, are facing political chaos, often wrought by populist leaders with simple yet stunningly wrong messaging about the nature of our complex world. I could be completely wrong, and I honestly hope I am. However, to me, it seems like we've entered into a new age of uncertainty and danger, unlike nearly anyone alive in any of these modern industrialized states remembers. Perhaps that's our problem. If we knew our history a bit better, we might recognize the warning signs more readily. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have comments or thoughts on this, I would certainly appreciate it. Please be respectful of others. If you like this content, please subscribe. I look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Thanks.